But can you please tell me a little bit of your background? So how many years have you been working as an immigration attorney?
24 years. I've been working 24 years. I was in import-export for 20 years before that. So I have a long history. But with the legal profession, immigration, 24 years. And a good 2021 has been private practice, representing clients all over the United States. And I was also an immigration judge for 2 years up in Boston.
2 years immigration.
2 years.
Okay, so when that happened and why did you decide to accept the position of immigration?
Well, it happened in July of 2023. And the reason why I accepted the position is after 20 years of practicing immigration law, I was ready to use that experience to be a judge. And of course, I saw many judges I did not think were doing a good job. So I felt this will be a good way for me to contribute. And I was right. And being a judge was one of the best things I've ever done. The impact I had was on 2,400 cases in 2 years. One judge, 2,400. In each case, I made decisions whether someone could stay in the United States or could not stay. Those were life-altering decisions, and I did my best for each one.
From those more than 2,000 cases, what was the percent of asylum? Okay.
80%.
80% of asylum.
80%. And those countries are different from the Southeast. Most of our clients were from Brazil, Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, Honduras, Guatemala. A lot of people from Guatemala. Those were the main countries, some of the African countries and some of the Central American countries. Not too many from Mexico. If you're in North Carolina, for example, you have a lot of Latino from Mexico, but not up in Boston.
Okay, so you just told me that you decided to become an immigration judge and accept the position because there was not, by your experience, like an attorney, you're seeing like the job they were doing, it was not the one that you expected. So why are you saying that? What was happening?
I didn't consider the hearings fair.
Why?
Because of the arbitrary way some of the judges were dismissing cases or interfering with testimony. Unless you were an experienced attorney, you could not counter the aggressiveness or arbitrary attitude of some of the judges, especially in Charlotte and Atlanta. These are the two worst cases for denials in the United States. The asylum denial rate was about 95%. Between Charlotte and Atlanta. Regretfully, and we'll get into this later, the national denial rate now is 93%. 93% of the asylum cases today are being denied. But that's why I got in, because I saw I could do a better job. And I did a better job. I'm proud of the job I did. And so that's what prompted me to get into being a judge.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So who offered you the position?
The Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is an agency of the Department of Justice. I was appointed by the Attorney General of the United States in August of 2023, Merrick Garland. Remember, immigration judges operate under the executive branch of government in the United States. They're not part of the judiciary. We're part of the executive. And within the executive, the Attorney General appoints the judges for immigration courts.
Okay, that was 2023, right? Under Biden administration.
Yes, under Biden.
Okay. And you were fired? When?
Yes, I was fired on July 11th, 2025 by Acting Director Cersei Owens, which was taking instructions from the White House. And there's been about 110 immigration judges that have been fired since Donald Trump became president. Unprecedented. I mean, you're talking about 110 that have been fired, maybe another 20 or 30 that just took retirement. It's a scathing attack on the court system. These are experienced judges. They've been on the bench for years. And to just dismiss them like that, the tragedy is not only the dismantling of the courts by firing judges, but they're being replaced with judges that have zero experience in immigration law. That's why the asylum grant rate has gone from 54% average nationally to 7%. It's become a rubber stamp judiciary. It's become a rubber stamp court. You can refer to it as a kangaroo court, which means clients, immigrants, have to now expect the worst of the worst in terms of fairness. Any attorney that doesn't educate and inform the immigrant client that we are in a different era and that you have to work 3 times as hard to have a chance to prevail. We can still prevail, but you have to overcome a lot of the bias and the pressure that the current judges are operating under, because they know if they make decisions outside of the scope of what the administration wants, they'll be fired. So they have a financial interest in how they decide cases, which is exactly the opposite of what you want from a judge. And of course, don't listen to me. You can go to the June 27th policy memo written by Cersei Owens that went to all the judges. The June 27th, 2025 memo said to every judge in the United States, it said, basic paraphrase, we see that some judges are biased. And if you're a biased judge, maybe you should get a different career. Otherwise, we'll fire you. This was the memo that went out. That's just one example of
The memo is public?
Sure, it's public. That memo is on the Executive Office of Immigration Review, June 27th, 2025, signed by Cersei Owens, acting director.
How they notify you fire? It was
By email. We knew exactly the day and the time the email would come. This was not a shock because I had seen my other colleagues being fired before I became fired. It was just a question of time before they got to me. And we knew exactly what day it would take place. And it did.
Wow. Do you have that email?
Of course I
Do
do.
you remember what email said?
The email basically was 2 or 3 sentences, and it said essentially, under Article 2 of the Constitution, you are not going to be converted to a full-time judge. You have until the end of the day to drop off your computer and badge. That's it. And my response to this email to the director and to my chief judge was, Dear Judge, as you know, many judges were terminated today. You know, many of us made huge sacrifices to serve. I'm sorry to see that our sacrifices were not appreciated, not even a thank you. Sincerely, George Pappas, immigration judge. That was my parting message.
Did you get any response to it? Did they give you any reason why you were fired?
No, not only did they not give a reason to me, they have not given a reason to any of the judges they have fired. This is referred to as no cause. There was no cause to fire us. In fact, my review exceeded all the targets that Donald Trump had established under Trump 1.0. I exceeded all of their targets. My review was A+. It was not based upon my performance. It was based upon what we think was their perception of who we were politically. Many of us were fired because we were private attorneys before we became judges who represented immigrants, that worked with nonprofits. These are the folks they dismissed. They did not want us in the bench because we knew what we were doing. They wanted people who followed orders and did not think on the bench in a fair way, which they legally had an obligation to do.
They call you, as the other 100 or more immigration judges, active immigration judges or liberal immigration judges. Do you see yourself as an active immigration judge?
No, I see myself as a judge that follows the law, that promotes fair hearings and due process. If we are called activists because we promote fair hearings and uphold due process according to the Fifth Amendment, if that's what a liberal judge is, if that's what an activist judge is, then I'm an activist judge.
So under administration Trump, less than 1 year.
2 years. 2 years.
Or 2 years under administration Trump.
I was under Trump, I was about 6-7 months.
6-7 months, right? Less than 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay. In those 6-7 months, did you receive any order from about what you had to do?
Yes.
Did they? Yes.
Yes, I had orders telling me how to rule in specific cases. This is a classic example of judicial interference. In May, I'll give you the example. In May, when Immigration Customs Enforcement entered the courthouses in Boston and in Chelmsford, Massachusetts, our chief judge wrote us a memo and said, stay out of the way. ICE will be coming to the courthouses today. That was the only guidance we got. I did not appreciate the guidance, so I had a conversation with my chief judge. Judge, you want to give us a little more guidance here? We have, for the first time now, after years of non-appearance, the attorneys for the Department of Homeland Security are now coming into court asking us to dismiss the cases at the first master hearing. You want to give us some guidance on that? He goes, just grant the motion. I said, grant the motion? You mean like rubber stamp the motion? He goes, well, unless the motion's defective, grant it. In other words, I was told to grant the motions. This is an example.
Can you please explain that? Because people who are going to be watching the video, they probably don't understand what is grant a motion.
If I grant the motion to dismiss, that means the case will no longer be in immigration court. Previously, pre-Trump, if your case was dismissed, you were allowed to leave the court. You were no longer in immigration court proceedings, and you could remain for a while or indefinitely in the United States, and you could even apply for work authorization. However, under Trump, if a case is dismissed and with ICE in the hallway, as soon as the case is dismissed, remember, they have no legal status. The case is dismissed. ICE was waiting outside the courtroom to lock them up with handcuffs, put them in detention, and try to deport them right away. This is why it was so dangerous to just grant the motion to dismiss. That's number one. That was the consequence. But immigrants have a right to wait 10 days so they can examine what the motion to dismiss is, whether they want to agree or disagree. Our administration told us, you don't have to wait 10 days. Just grant it right away. And this was with people without lawyers. Well, I did not grant the motion to dismiss because I always reviewed these cases on the merits. And if a person had an asylum application already on file, I would ask the person, do you still want to pursue your asylum application? And they would say yes. And then I would turn to the government and say, your motion is denied. And off we went.
How many times did you do that?
That was
7 months.
That was at least 8 to 10 times I did that. Remember, I was fired July 11th. This started in May. And this was typically done during what we call master hearings. The master hearing is where the immigrant comes and explains what relief they may be eligible for. We advise them of their rights. This is not a place to just order someone removed, typically. So, but I did it many times based on the merits, not based upon what they wanted me to do. But I also resisted. I resisted by publishing the law and the regulations which obligate the judge to give the immigrant 10 days to respond to the motion to dismiss. How ironic that by publishing the law, I am seen as an activist resisting. This is how the topsy-turvy or surreal the judicial environment has become.
So the day they were saying hey, you need to dismiss the case, it was the same day that ICE was there?
Yes, not only that day, but whenever the counsel, the attorneys for the Department of Homeland Security would ask for a motion to dismiss, it was basically a blanket order, just grant them. But it started when ICE entered the courthouses. What this means is there used to be a firewall between the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. They're both part of the executive, but there was a firewall. Starting May, the firewall disappeared. Now the Department of Justice and the judges became one. We became part of the deportation machine.
Wow. Stop.
That's
And I believe for you as a judge, it has to be tough too.
It wasn't tough
some
for me
cases-
because I resisted. I resisted based on the law.
How did you feel when you were resisting? Because you probably knew something was going to happen. Like you were putting in risk your job as well, your position as an immigration judge, right?
Well, think of it this way. What we do in this life will echo for a lifetime, forever. You have to make a moral decision. You either do your job, follow the rules. You took an oath to the Constitution, not to the president, not to the Department of Justice. We took an oath to defend the Constitution. And so I slept very easily at night because I kept close to my oath. And if any judge has moral fiber, they would do the same.
Who gave you that order? Like you to the...
That was my assistant chief judge. And he got the instructions from a national regional chief judge published in a memo on May 30th. This is all documented.
Okay. Another question. So there is a press release in the White House that say that the asylum cases has been dropping a lot.
Yeah.
from previous administration.
That's right.
I'm a journalist in North Carolina, right? I've been in immigration courts in Charlotte, in Stewart Detention Center, in another city. It was federal court. But it has been really, really hard to get asylum approved. Probably it's just North Carolina, right? But before, okay, so what was the percent in your perception of asylum granted before Trump and now? Do you believe the cases has been dropping a lot to 7%?
Yes.
Because my experience is like asylum was not approved. There was not a high percent of asylum cases approved. Probably that's my conception because I'm here in North Carolina. Probably if I go to New York, to up states, the percentage is a little bit higher. This is what I saw, what is public, like in the state of the South, Texas, it's really, really, really low. If you go to state up north, the country is higher. So what is your conception as immigration judge and attorney as well about cases approved under Biden administration and now?
Well, historically, before Trump, between Charlotte and Atlanta, the denial rate was over 90%. This was one of the more hostile immigration courts in the country. At that same time, if you went to Boston or New York, maybe 50% were granted as opposed to 10%. Regional differences made a big impact before Trump. Now, the average grant rate for asylum pre-Trump was about 54%. Now it's 7%. The New York Times documented this with their report about 3 weeks ago. And the White House also published the New York Times report to show what a good job they're doing by pushing down the asylum rate. What it reflects is the takeover of due process in the immigration courts. These judges are basically making it virtually impossible to grant asylum.
Following others, I believe.
Exactly. That's why they were appointed.
What is your opinion about that, about the military judges?
Conflict of interest. They took an oath not to defend fairness and due process. They took an oath to defend the Constitution and to obey the orders of their commander-in-chief. Their ethical code is in conflict with their judicial duty. They should not be on the bench.
Is there a new way? Because so many things are happening, and I feel like president is there and nobody can, complain or fill out a complaint, something like that. Is there any legal way for you as immigration judge, like the other 100, to fill out a complaint? Like, that's not,
I can't go.
Have you thought about taking legal actions about that or not?
I can't comment.
Can you take
Of
legal
course I
actions
can.
or not?
Of course I can, and I am with several others. That's all I can tell you at the moment. I'm not talking about it because we're in litigation.
Okay, so you already have filled out something.
That's right. So the answer is yes, we can
Okay.
push back legally. We're not sitting back idly. Absolutely. We feel that, the courts have the final say on this. I'm not going to go into further detail on that.
Do you remember your last court?
Sure,
Immigration court?
I sure do. It was a cancellation of removal case. I granted relief, but it was one of the best decisions I made. In fact, the Department of Homeland Security attorney was reserving the right to appeal my decision. Because I asked him in the beginning, do you waive or reserve? He goes, Your Honor, we're going to reserve. I said, all right, I'm going to give you my decision now. And so I spent about 30, 40 minutes giving my decision. And after I gave my decision, the department changed their mind. We're not going to appeal because they heard my reasoning. They understood what I was doing. So the government pushed back, said, no, we're not going to appeal. And the person was granted cancellation of removal, which means they're going to get a green card. They deserved it.
Do you remember who were there?
It was a woman. I can tell you that she probably dropped to the floor crying when she heard the decision. I remember the attorneys involved. And I'm very close with both attorneys, both for the government and for the private counsel. By the way, both attorneys in New England, Boston, and Chelmsford, where I presided, respected the way I conducted my court. They knew I was tough, but they knew I was fair. They did not want me to go. Both attorneys, both sides. They didn't know, and I didn't know that was my last hearing because I got the decision maybe a day later. But it was my last hearing. I remember it very well.
From the more than 2,000 cases you had as an immigration judge, how many, it was an 80% asylums, right? How many did you grant it and how many did you deny?
Well, after 2 years, about 54% is where I landed. 54% were granted. Okay. It depends on the kind of docket or schedule that you have as a judge. If I was doing more detained cases, my denial rate would be higher, primarily because most of the detained cases don't have a lawyer. If you don't have a lawyer in immigration court, the chances of you getting approval is very small.
How many of the cases you didn't have a lawyer?
Very few. I would say maybe 10% of the cases that I did not have a lawyer. They're called non-detained cases. About 90% of my cases had a lawyer.
What would be your recommendation after working more than 2 years as an immigration judge? There's so many cases and the system feels like it's overwhelming, yes. I know we're living in a very, very tough moment and I don't want to give people this courage to keep, because this is what we feel and this is how I feel as a journalist. I feel like the government is doing everything to discourage people and to live by themselves instead of fighting. And
Well, we've entered the arena of cruelty. We have a government which has adopted the policy of cruelty, not just on immigration courts. There's an assault on all of our institutions. The State Department had 1,500 people fired in one sweep. The Department of Education has been virtually destroyed. Okay. USA aid, foreign aid is virtually stopped. Billions that used to go to foreign aid, gone. Consumer Protection Board, almost dismissed. But for the federal court, it's not just immigration courts. The ideology needs to be understood by the people here as to why the politics of cruelty is being implemented. You have J.D. Vance, Vice President of the United States, Stephen Miller, Assistant Chief of Staff, Marco Rubio. Those three in particular are promoting an ideology which is hostile to American democracy. They believe that they can define who a real American is. See, according to this administration, you are only a real American if you have soil and history in this country. So if you have lineage, ancestors that go back to the American Civil War, for example, then you are a privileged American because you represent the real culture of America. And therefore you have the right to make the best decisions for the United States. So they created a hierarchy of who a real American is. That hierarchy is a blueprint for fascism. That's what it is, which means if you're a recent American, you're not equal. This is the ideology. And if we bring in more immigrants, it will poison the blood of the United States. The last time we heard about the poisoning of blood was during the Nazi era in the 1930s. This was the Nazi ideology of how to purge Jews from German society. Well, now immigrants are considered the others who are poisoning the real American culture. This is the ideology which is driving the assault on immigration courts.
a couple of questions about the process. I always wanted to ask an immigration judge, like, what a case has to have to be approved by you, for example, as an immigration. An asylum case should have for you to decide to approve it. Because in the course that I've been with people that had great cases, I was in the hearing, I was like, okay. I feel like you need to be almost killed or killed and revived, to have an asylum approved.
That question is really good, and it's not an easy answer, but I'll give you the contours of what has to be in place. Number one, the judge has to know asylum law. Let me repeat that. The judge has to know the complexities of asylum law. Those of us that were dismissed were not replaced by judges who have knowledge of immigration law. This is a big problem. So they're not going to be able to see the value of asylum evidence in the way that would help to provide a grant for asylum. So that's number one. Number two, any lawyer or any case must have evidence to support the kind of persecution, and this is important, that is protected under asylum law. Remember, persecution is a wide spectrum, but asylum law only protects a narrow part of that spectrum. For example, If you are facing death threats because you owe money to a loan shark and you're seeking asylum because you're afraid of your life, you will not be protected. You will not be granted asylum. Why? Because under international law and U.S. asylum law, threats by a loan shark is not a protected persecution ground. It falls outside the scope of what asylum protects. And too many people feel, well, I've been threatened by a gang member. I've been threatened by a loan shark. I can't find a job. There's no opportunity here. None of those reasons will be protected under asylum law. Economic poverty, lack of economic opportunity is not covered under asylum. And those cases will be denied.
So what is covered?
Race. If you're persecuted because of your race, maybe you're indigenous, your political opinion. It could be your opinion or maybe your political affiliation or your political activism. That's protected under asylum law. Your nationality. If you're being persecuted because of your nationality, that's protected under asylum
For
law.
example, a lot of people from Nicaragua who have been, in famous protests of 2018, that's political opinion. That's political affiliation if they're affiliated.
Well, that's a start. That's a ground that could be protected. So that would not be necessarily a waste of time. But now they have to prove they were in fact persecuted because of their participation in a protest. They have to prove it. How were you arrested? Where were you when you were arrested? Was it one time? Was it two times? Were you the only person arrested? A lot of evidence has to be supplied. Were you tortured when you were arrested? Were you injured? Did you go to a doctor? Do you have any doctor receipts?
Sometimes I've seen that judge has asked him or her to show any proof of, do you have any scars?
Yeah.
Can you please show me? Can you take out your shirt?
Well, the reason why they ask it because the individual applying for asylum says, I was tortured. How were you tortured? I was tortured for, 6 hours each day for 2 weeks. And how did they torture? With batons, with wires, with electrical cords? Describe how you were tortured. So the torturing is very severe. How did you escape? Oh, a family member bribed somebody and they had a car to wait for me and they bribed one of the jail people to take me out of the jail without anybody seeing. And they took me to the hospital right away. Did you get any medical report from the doctor, from the hospital? Do you have any proof? Were there any scars? Because this is pretty serious. If the evidence does not support the description of the harm, it starts to look weak.
Can you give me an example of one asylum case you have when you were in prison?
Mostly domestic violence victims. Women
Domestic violence in their home country.
in their home country. Previously to Pam Bondi's decision in August of 2025, women who were victims of domestic violence that they could not escape were allowed and perceived as another category of protection, persecuted social groups. The Trump administration took away this designation of protection. Women, by virtue of their gender, can no longer claim asylum. This is horrible because women in Guatemala, for example, are treated less than dogs. Their partners will tie them up, whip them, beat them, rape them repeatedly. Animals have a better existence than the women in these societies. And I received many of these cases, and many of them I did grant. The women were credible with the evidence that they provided. The country condition reports certainly underscored the evidence that femicide, for example, the killing of women by virtue of just being a woman, was rampant. And while the government had official legislation to protect women, they did nothing to protect them. These women were victims of the machismo culture and of the femicide. It was horrible, and it's still going on today. And what's sad is our government has let these people just drown by taking away that designation. I'm fighting one right now where the government was complicit in the domestic violence. There we can still win. But I granted many of those cases, especially out of Guatemala.
Do you have any regret as an immigration judge, the years that you've been, like something that...
No regrets.
No regret. Okay.
Because I prepped my cases, I reviewed the issues, and with the information I had, I did the best possible job I could do. I don't regret what I did. I know I gave them a fair hearing, and just in case somebody disagreed with me, they could have appealed to the Board of Immigration of Appeals. And close to 90% of my cases were sustained. Only one was reversed, and that was on a minor issue on a different case, not asylum. So I have no regrets about what I did. I'm very proud of the way I handled my courtroom. Absolutely.
How did you feel when you get a notification? You told me that you were expecting to receive an email, but the moment you were reading, how did you feel?
Well, I wasn't shocked. I was expecting it. I was disappointed. I said, it's really that bad. I mean, I've done the job, and obviously they don't care. It was really more of a pathetic side to just realize how bad the situation had become. It wasn't just me. It was all of us. And so I was really disgusted with the whole assault on immigration courts. And I stayed as long as I could. I called my courthouse the Chelmsford Titanic because I knew the ship was sinking. We had 18 judges in September of 2024. When I was fired, they were down to 6. That's just one courthouse. The San Francisco court had 21 judges, down to 4, and they're closing the court. Yeah, in San Francisco.
Right.
It wasn't just
So
my
they
court.
were just 6. So they replace you guys with some other, or they
2 or 3.
just 6?
They replaced us with 2 or 3 other judges who were military background. They're called JAGs. And my colleague that was in Chelmsford, she was just fired 2 weeks ago. So they're still firing people. The people that they're keeping are the ones that were formerly attorneys with the Department of Homeland Security. Okay, that's the ones they're mostly keeping. So if you were with the Department of Homeland Security before you were a judge, you were pretty safe. And those are the judges that are still working in Chelmsford. The rest of us are gone.
Wow. With that situation in the country immigration thing, what will be your message to the immigrant community and to those people who are trying to fight to stay in the U.S.?
Lower your expectations for success. Work very closely with a lawyer. Do not try to do this by yourself. It's already difficult with a lawyer. The regulations and the law is changing almost daily. So lower your expectations. Be prepared for an unjust result. There are still ways to fight legally, but you're going to have to appeal, most likely to the federal courts. So you're going to need to work with attorneys that have experience in federal court as well. If anybody promises you success, run, walk away. There is no guarantee. The system is very unfair and very hostile. There's still glimmers of hope. For example, we've filed habeas corpus petitions in federal court. I think over 30,000 over them have been approved. The federal courts are pushing back against the illegality and defiance by the Department of Justice and forcing immigration judges to have bond hearings. We have to go to federal court to force the immigration courts to have bond hearings. But even when they're forced to have bond hearings, many of these judges are already deciding to deny. It's very unfair. But if we have a strong case in front of a judge, even if they want to deny, they're going to have a tough time. It's going to take an experienced attorney to push back in the following way. I and many other attorneys walk into immigration court and we tell the court and the judge, this is an unfair hearing. Before we even look at the facts, this is an unfair hearing. You are prejudicing this hearing. We do this before we even start. We're putting them on notice that this is a kangaroo court without using the word kangaroo. Why? Because we're preparing our case for appeal. If you appeal a case because of its unconstitutional protection of due process, even if the judge rules against you, we can go to federal court because we preserved that constitutional argument. That's what they have to expect. But be truthful with your attorney. Tell them everything. Stay away from notorios. They know nothing and they don't care. They have no ethics and they'll take your money.
It's illegal. The notary can...
Of course it's illegal. They can't practice law. They shouldn't be helping you fill out forms. They're not lawyers. They're not going to be responsible when something goes wrong. They're going to be running away. You pay what you get for.
Are you thinking if at some point you can come back as an ID, would you be willing to do it again or not?
I would be willing to do it as long as I can promote my fair hearings and due process. Don't interfere with that because we have legal obligations to do that. If you interfere with that, I have no desire to be on the bench. As long as there's that interference, I'm not going on the bench. But as long as I can promote fair hearings and due process, I'd be there tomorrow.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add?
Don't be afraid because that's what they're trying to achieve. They want you to be afraid. Don't be afraid to speak out or have an organization speak out. If you don't speak out, our democracy will disappear. pretty soon you'll want to go back to your country rather than stay here. Don't let this opportunity be missed. People need to be collectively organized with their communities. Don't isolate yourself. Look what happened in Minneapolis when the people came out. We stopped ICE. We embarrassed them. We lost many people, 2 murders there, but the resistance worked. And hopefully we'll have more of that resistance as we go into the November elections. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, don't vote. You're not allowed to vote, but you can speak. Speak to your neighbors. Don't be afraid, because that's exactly what they want. Thank you.
Thank you so much.